Okay, y'all. You are not going to believe the absolutely insane, heartbreaking, mind-bending story I'm about to unpack for you. This isn't just a story. This was my entire life, and it was built on a mountain of lies. The moment I realized my entire existence, everything I believed about my family, was a complete sham. Started with what seemed like the most innocent thing, helping my mom clean out the attic. But what I found up there, it made me ask truly, who TF are my parents and who TF am I? I've debated sharing this for a long time because it's deeply personal, messy, and frankly still hurts like hell. But you need to hear it. This isn't just about a secret. It's about betrayal so deep it warps your sense of reality. If you're ready for the whole unfiltered truth, and trust me, it's a lot, hit that like, subscribe right now, and honestly, share this with anyone who needs to hear it. You won't want to miss a single detail of this. Grab a drink, maybe a tissue, because this is going to be a long ride. All right, deep breath. Here's where it all began. Growing up, my world was idyllic, picture perfect even. We lived in Oak Haven, a quaint little town nestled in the Finger Lakes region of New York. Think rolling hills, vibrant autumn leaves, the smell of wood smoke in winter. Our house was a cozy, 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, the kind of place where neighbors brought over fresh-baked pies and kids rode bikes until dusk. My parents, Sarah and Richard Miller, were by all accounts the epitome of a loving, stable couple. My mom, Sarah, was an elementary school librarian. She had this soft, gentle voice, always smelled faintly of old books and chamomile tea, and her laugh was like wind chimes. She'd spend hours reading to me, curled up on the window seat, her finger tracing the words in classic fairy tales. She taught me to love stories, to get lost in other worlds, and to believe in the magic of imagination. She was my confidant, my comfort. Every scraped knee, every first heartbreak, she was there with a hug and the perfect comforting phrase. She had a way of making everything feel safe, like nothing bad could ever truly touch me as long as she was around. She was the anchor of our home, meticulously organized, always baking, always making sure we had enough warm blankets in winter and fresh lemonade in summer. My dad, Richard, was a civil engineer. He was the strong, silent type, but his love was just as palpable. He'd come home from work, dusty blueprints tucked under his arm, and despite his long hours, he'd always have time to toss a baseball with me in the backyard, or help me with a particularly tricky math problem. He taught me how to change a tire, how to use a screwdriver, how to be independent. He was my protector, my rock. He was the kind of dad who coached my little league team, volunteered for every school event, and made sure our car was always serviced and ready for our annual summer road trips to the coast. He had this quiet integrity about him, a man of his word, someone you could always rely on. Everyone in Oak Haven respected Richard Miller. They'd say he was a pillar of the community, a straight shooter, dependable as the sunrise. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had everything we needed and more, not just materially, but emotionally. Our house was filled with laughter, lively dinner conversations, and the occasional sibling squabble between me and my older brother, David. David was 4 years older than me, my built-in bodyguard and tormentor, as older brothers often are. He was the golden child, smart, athletic, destined for great things. We had the usual sibling rivalry, but underneath it, there was a deep bond. We shared secrets, covered for each other, and navigated the tricky waters of adolescence together. He was the only person who knew all my embarrassing childhood stories, and I knew his. He was my family, my blood. Or so I thought. Family traditions were sacred in our house. Sundays were for long walks by Lake Cayuga, followed by my mom's famous roast chicken. Christmas was always at our house, a huge affair with relatives coming from all over. Or so I thought. Looking back now, the relatives were mostly my dad's side. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all with that distinctive Miller jawline and a penchant for loud, boisterous laughter. My mom's side, they were sparse, almost non-existent. I remember asking about her family once, maybe when I was around 8 or 9. "Mom, where are Grandma and Grandpa Sarah's parents?" She just sighed, a little wistfully, and said, "Oh, darling, they passed away when I was very young. It's just us now, sweetie." She'd brush my hair back from my face, a gentle, sad smile. And being a kid, I just accepted it. It made sense. Some people just don't have extended family. And it was a sad story, so I didn't push. There were photos everywhere in our house. Albums filled with snapshots of my parents' wedding, my brother's birth, my own first steps, countless birthdays, holidays, graduations. A visual timeline of a perfect life, perfectly documented. We had a meticulously curated family tree hanging in the hallway, tracing the Miller line back through generations, a proud testament to our roots in upstate New York. My mom had even painted it herself, with delicate little leaves and branches for each person. I remember feeling so proud of it, pointing out the names of my great-grandparents, feeling that deep connection to history, to my history. My childhood was woven with threads of safety, trust, and unquestioning love. I truly believed I was the luckiest kid in the world. My parents were my world, my compass, my absolute North Star. They instilled in me strong values: honesty, integrity, hard work, kindness. They taught me that family was everything, that you protect the ones you love, and that truth always prevails. The irony of that last one stings me every single day. Every decision they made, every piece of advice they gave, every sacrifice they made seemed to stem from a place of pure, unadulterated love for me and David. They nurtured my passions: piano lessons, art classes, hiking in the woods. They were always there, cheering me on, picking me up when I fell. They made me feel seen, cherished, and utterly secure. The idea that any of it could be anything but the truth, was beyond my wildest imagination. It wasn't just a lack of suspicion. It was an absolute, fundamental belief in the bedrock of my existence. They were my parents. I was their daughter. End of story. But as I said, some stories aren't so simple. And the seemingly solid ground beneath me, it was about to crack wide open. You see, even in the most perfectly curated narratives, sometimes the smallest, most insignificant details start to fray around the edges. Little inconsistencies that you brush off, little feelings that you can't quite place, little whispers that you tell yourself are just your imagination. Those were the first threads pulling at the fabric of my perfect life, long before I ever knew what they meant. And those threads, they slowly, subtly, started to unravel. So, that was my childhood. Happy, secure, utterly conventional. But even in the most tightly woven tapestry, sometimes you find a loose thread, a slightly off-color stitch. And as I got older, especially in my late teens and early 20s, those little anomalies started to pop up more frequently. Nothing that screamed, "Warning, lies ahead," but enough to leave a faint, almost imperceptible echo of unease in the back of my mind. One of the biggest red flags I rationalized away involved our family photos. We had so many, right? Albums galore. But as I got older, I started noticing patterns. My mom, Sarah, was in every picture of David and me growing up. My dad, Richard, was too. But almost all of the photos with my mom, the ones from before, she met my dad, were always of her alone, or with a few generic-looking friends, none of whom I ever met or heard stories about. There were no pictures of her with her parents, no childhood photos of her with a sibling. It was always just Sarah, young, smiling, but always a solitary figure in her past. I remember once, when I was home from college for a summer break, I was flipping through an old photo album, one of those big, leather-bound ones with yellowing pages. I found a picture of my mom, probably in her early 20s, looking absolutely stunning, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. It was a Victorian-style home, elaborate, with a big wraparound porch and a swing. Definitely not anything I'd ever seen in Oak Haven. "Mom," I asked, holding it up, "whose house was this? Was this your first apartment or something?" She was stirring a pot of tomato sauce on the stove, her back to me. She froze for a split second, almost imperceptibly, before turning around with a slightly too bright smile. "Oh, that old thing? Just a house I lived in for a bit during college, dear. An old friend's place, nothing special." She took the photo from me, quickly, and placed it back in the album without looking at it again. And then she changed the subject, to dinner plans. It wasn't a huge thing, but the shift in her demeanor, the subtle stiffness, it just stuck. I remember thinking, that was weird. But then I shrugged it off. College houses, temporary friends, who cares? Another thing that often struck me as odd was how fiercely private my parents were about anything regarding their early lives, especially my mom. My dad would occasionally tell stories about growing up in Buffalo, fishing with his grandpa, getting into trouble with his cousins. They were always wholesome, endearing tales. But my mom, her stories were always about Oak Haven. When I was your age, we used to ride our bikes down to the old mill. Or, I remember when the library first got computers, that was a big deal. It was like her life began the moment she moved to Oak Haven and met my dad. Anything before that was a blank slate. Or if she did mention something, it was vague, almost intentionally nondescript. "Oh, a small town upstate," or "I had a few friends from high school." Never a name, never a specific place she grew up in, never a detailed anecdote about a specific memory from her early childhood. I'd try to probe sometimes, innocently. "Mom, what was high school like for you? Did you have a best friend like Chloe?" Chloe was my best friend in high school. We were inseparable. Mom would just laugh. "Oh, high school was high school. Lots of studying, not much excitement." And then she'd quickly divert. "How's Chloe doing? Are you two planning to go to the movies this weekend?" It was a subtle art she had perfected, the conversational pivot. At the time, I just thought she was a private person. Or maybe her childhood wasn't as interesting as mine, or perhaps it was even painful. I mean, she did say her parents passed away young. So I just assumed it was a sensitive topic. I respected that. There were also the holidays: Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays. My dad's side of the family was enormous, loud, and fantastic. Aunts, uncles, dozens of cousins, all in Oak Haven or nearby towns. We'd have huge gatherings, kids running everywhere, food piled high. But my mom had virtually no one. Her side was just her. She'd always make a point of saying how much she loved being with my dad's family, how happy she was to have so many people to share holidays with, almost as if she was compensating for a void. It never occurred to me that the void wasn't due to deceased parents, but something far more complicated. I just thought, poor mom, it's sad she lost her family so young. And sometimes, I'd catch a look on her face, a flicker of something, unreadable, almost haunted, when everyone else was laughing and boisterous. Like she was an observer, not a full participant. I'd always shake it off, telling myself it was just melancholic memories of loss. Then there was the issue of medical history. You know, those forms you fill out at the doctor's office. They always ask about family history, heart disease, cancer, diabetes. My dad could always fill out his side no problem. His parents, grandparents, clear lineage. But for my mom's side, it was always unknown, or no significant family history. My mom would usually just say, "Well, my parents died young, so I don't have much information." and I'd think, man, that sucks. She doesn't even know her own family's health risks. Even my brother David had the same blank spaces for our maternal history. It made sense. If you don't know your family, you don't know their medical history. I just accepted it as an unfortunate reality. Another peculiar instance, and this one really stands out in hindsight, was a school project. I was in 5th grade, and we had to do a family tree project. Not the artistic kind my mom had painted in the hallway, but a detailed, researched one. We had to interview grandparents, get dates, places, occupations. I remember being so excited. I went to my mom, asking her all these questions, and she got flustered. Unusually so. She said, "Honey, my family is very small, and as I told you, my parents are gone. It's just not as exciting as your father's side. Why don't you focus on the Miller side? You have so much rich history there." She even offered to help me research my dad's family history online, meticulously pulling up old census records and newspaper clippings. She wanted me to focus on the Miller side, almost steering me away from her own. I remember feeling a little deflated, but mostly just happy to have her help with the project. It was a good grade. No harm done. Or so I thought. These weren't seismic shifts. They were tiny, almost imperceptible tremors, bits of static on a perfectly clear radio signal. Moments where something didn't quite click, but I didn't have enough information to form a coherent question, let alone a suspicion. I trusted my parents implicitly. They were honest people. They taught me honesty. Why would they lie about anything? It was unthinkable. I believed them. I rationalized. I dismissed. I filed away the odd moments as quirky parental behavior or simply facts of life, rather than pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed. My life was so solid, so grounded in the love and truth my parents had presented. The thought of them being anything less than completely transparent with me was an insult to my intelligence, to our bond. It was a betrayal too monumental to even conceive of. So I didn't. I just kept living my life, growing up, heading off to college, building my own future, all on this beautifully constructed, meticulously maintained foundation. A foundation, I was soon to discover, that was built entirely on sand. And the first crack in that foundation, the one that would send everything tumbling down, was something I stumbled upon completely by accident, during a perfectly ordinary, mundane task. It was innocent, harmless, and utterly devastating. The storm broke not with a bang, but with a whisper. A literal whisper of rustling papers in the dusty silence of our attic. It was late spring, my junior year of college, and I was home for a long weekend. My mom had been complaining for months about the cluttered attic, and I, ever the dutiful daughter, offered to help her tackle it. "Just 2 days," I promised. "We'll get it sorted." Little did I know, those 2 days would obliterate everything I thought I knew about my life. The attic was a treasure trove of forgotten memories. Old Christmas decorations, childhood art projects, boxes of dusty textbooks. It smelled of cedar and old paper. My mom was downstairs tackling the garage, so it was just me, the silence, and the ghosts of forgotten things. I was working my way through a stack of boxes labeled MISC, tucked away in a corner behind an old rocking horse. Most were filled with old magazines, broken electronics, things to donate. But then I hit a box that felt different. It was smaller, made of sturdy dark wood, not cardboard. It had a delicate brass clasp, tarnished with age. No label. Curiosity, that dangerous, insistent itch, got the better of me. This box felt personal. I unlapped it, the sound a faint click in the quiet. Inside, it wasn't junk. It was neatly organized, almost lovingly so. At the top was a stack of letters, tied, with a faded blue ribbon. Underneath, a small, worn, leather-bound diary. And beneath that, tucked flat against the bottom, a handful of old, sepia-toned photographs. My heart gave a little flutter. Old family heirlooms? Maybe something of my mom's parents, the ones she always said passed away young. I pulled out the top photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, probably in her early 20s, standing with a man. She was striking, with dark curly hair, and eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the faded photo. The man was tall, with a kind smile. They were holding hands, standing in front of a rustic-looking cabin, clearly in love. This woman looked incredibly familiar, but I couldn't place her. Then it hit me, a punch to the gut. She looked exactly like me. Not just a resemblance, but almost uncannily so. The same nose, the same curve of the lips, the exact same shape of the eyes. My stomach dropped. This wasn't my mom. My mom had lighter hair, a softer jawline. This woman was me, 20 years ago. My hands started to tremble. I grabbed another photo. This one, the same woman, but clearly pregnant, her belly round and prominent, holding the man's hand again. And then, the third one, a baby, swaddled in a blanket, cradled in the woman's arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and impossibly, those same eyes. My eyes. My breath caught in my throat. This was not a relative I'd ever seen. This was not anyone in our family tree. Who was this woman? Who was this baby? Why did she look so much like me? A cold dread started to spread through me, chilling me from the inside out. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A distant cousin? A family friend whose baby looked like me? But the resemblance was too strong, too perfect. Then I saw it, tucked beneath the stack of photos. A single, official-looking document. It was folded neatly, almost deliberately hidden. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling. It was yellowed with age, brittle, a birth certificate, my own birth certificate. No, wait. My own birth certificate had always been in a safe deposit box at the bank, or so my parents had told me. And the one I'd seen a copy of for school applications, for my driver's license, for my passport. It listed Sarah and Richard Miller as my parents. This one was different. I unfolded it slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. My name was there, clear as day. Jessica Emily Miller. The date of birth was correct. The place of birth, a hospital in Albany, correct. But the names of the parents listed? My mother's name was not Sarah Miller. It was a name I had never ever heard before. Eleanor Vance. And my father's name? Not Richard Miller. Daniel Thorne. My vision blurred. The world spun. Eleanor Vance. Daniel Thorne. Who were these people? My mind screamed, "No, this isn't real. This is a mistake, a joke. Someone else's birth certificate." But the name, Jessica Emily Miller, my full name, the exact date, the correct place. It was undeniably mine. And the woman in the photos, the one who looked exactly like me, she had to be Eleanor Vance. She was my biological mother. And the man, Daniel Thorne, was my biological father. The air in the attic suddenly felt thin, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. My parents, Sarah and Richard. They weren't my parents. My entire life, my entire identity, everything I believed was true. It was a lie. A carefully constructed, meticulously maintained lie. The happy childhood, the strong family unit, the traditions, the family tree. It was all a stage, a performance, and I was the unsuspecting actor. The subtle oddities, the vague answers, the avoidance of her past, the lack of photos of her childhood, the absent family history. the sudden change of subject when I asked about her early life. All those red flags I had rationalized away snapped into horrifying focus. They weren't quirks. They weren't sensitive topics. They were deliberate omissions, cover-ups. A desperate effort to conceal a truth so profound, so devastating, it shattered my very foundation. I slumped against the dusty old chest, the birth certificate clutched in my trembling hand, the photos scattered around me like shattered fragments of my old life. The silence of the attic, once comforting, now felt menacing, accusatory. Every single memory, every loving gesture, every I love you from Sarah and Richard suddenly felt tainted, twisted. Was it love, or was it an elaborate charade? Was I a child they truly loved, or just a secret they kept? My mom's gentle voice, my dad's steady presence. They had been my world, and in an instant, that world had imploded. The pain was physical, a sharp, piercing ache in my chest. Betrayal. Disbelief. A profound sense of loss for a family I thought I had, and an overwhelming, desperate need to understand who these real parents were, and why in God's name my life had been built on such a colossal lie. I looked down at the birth certificate again, at the names Eleanor Vance and Daniel Thorne. Strangers, ghosts, my parents. I heard the garage door rumble open downstairs, my mom calling, "Jess, how's it going up there, sweetie? Need any help?" My blood ran cold. She was coming, and I was holding the undeniable proof of her betrayal. What was I going to do? What could I possibly say? The world I knew had just been ripped apart, and the architects of that destruction were about to walk right into the room. I had to hide it. I had to pretend. But how do you pretend when your entire universe has just been shattered into a million pieces? I had absolutely no idea what to do next. But I knew one thing. My life would never ever be the same. I heard the garage door rumble open downstairs, my mom calling, "Jess, how's it going up there, sweetie? Need any help?" Her voice, usually a comfort, now felt like a predator's purr. My blood ran cold. She was coming, and I was holding the undeniable proof of her betrayal. My birth certificate, listing parents I'd never heard of, lay crumpled in my shaking hand. The photos of Eleanor Vance, my actual mother, staring up at me, a ghostly reflection of my own face. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized me. My mind raced, not about confronting her, but about hiding the evidence. My first primal instinct was survival. I couldn't let her see I knew. Not yet. I scrambled, shoving the birth certificate back into the wooden box, tucking the photos underneath, praying I put them back exactly as I'd found them. The box itself felt scorching hot in my hands, a forbidden artifact. I wrestled it back into the dusty corner, behind the rocking horse, pushing some old blankets over it for good measure. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs. "Just finishing up here, Mom," I yelled back, my voice remarkably steady, considering my insides were doing a full-on interpretive dance of horror. I grabbed a random armful of old newspapers and stood, forcing a casual stance as she ascended the pull-down stairs, her face streaked with a little grease from the garage. "Oh, good. You found the old Star Wars comics. David will love these," she said, smiling warmly, completely oblivious to the earthquake that had just ripped through my world. She took the papers from me, her hand brushing mine. A normal motherly gesture. But now, it felt like a snake coiling around my arm. I managed a shaky smile back, my eyes probably wide with residual shock. But she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, and just chose not to. The rest of that day, and the days that followed, were a blur of performance. I was an actress in my own life, playing the part of dutiful daughter, home for the weekend. Every smile from my mom, every gentle touch, every "I love you, sweetie" from my dad, felt like a poisoned arrow. My stomach churned constantly. Dinner conversations, usually a source of comfort and connection, became agonizing exercises in restraint. My parents would talk about local gossip, about my brother David's latest accomplishments at his law firm in Boston, about summer plans, and I would nod, offer polite responses, all while a silent scream echoed in my head. You lied to me. My whole life is a lie. I watched them, truly watched them for the first time, not with the trusting eyes of a child, but with the cold, analytical gaze of someone who had just discovered a hidden betrayal. And oh, the red flags, once dismissed, now flew like giant crimson banners. My mom's sudden fluster when I'd asked about the Victorian house photo. Not just privacy, but fear. Her vague stories about her past. Not shyness, but deliberate obfuscation. Her lack of family. Not just tragedy, but a calculated emptiness she chose to maintain. One evening, my dad, Richard, was going over some old tax documents at the dining room table. He looked up at me, sensing my quietness. Everything okay, Jess? You've been a little subdued since you got home. My heart lurched. Was he onto me? Did he suspect I knew? I forced a laugh. Just tired, Dad. College finals are brutal, you know. He chuckled. Tell me about it. Engineering school nearly killed me. And he launched into a story about pulling all-nighters in his dorm at Cornell, details he'd shared 100 times. And I sat there nodding along, thinking, Cornell? Or did you just pick that school out of a hat, Richard? What else have you manufactured? The weight of the secret I now carried, alone, was suffocating. I couldn't confide in David. He was just as much in the dark as I had been, and dropping this bombshell on him felt impossible, like destroying his world too. Besides, what if he didn't believe me? What if he thought I was crazy? Or worse, what if he sided with our parents? He was their golden child, their pride and joy. The thought of confronting them, of blowing up our picture-perfect life, sent shivers down my spine. I was terrified. Terrified of the truth. Terrified of the fallout. Terrified of losing the only family I'd ever known, even if they were built on a foundation of lies. That night, lying in my childhood bed, the moonlight slicing through the blinds, I stared at the ceiling. Every memory replayed itself, but now with a grotesque twist. The family tree my mom had lovingly painted, a cruel joke. The stories of Mom's parents dying young, a carefully crafted narrative to explain away her missing history. My whole life was a carefully constructed fiction, and I was the unwitting protagonist. The irony of my parents instilling values like honesty and integrity in me was so bitter, it made my throat ache. They had preached truth while living a monumental lie. I kept replaying the image of Eleanor Vance's face, my face, in that old photograph. Who was she? Why was I with Sarah and Richard? Was I kidnapped? Adopted? Abandoned? My mind spiraled, inventing horrifying scenarios, each one more painful than the last. I felt like an alien in my own home, living among strangers, who wore the faces of my beloved parents. The silence in the house, usually peaceful, now felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken secrets. I could hear my dad's gentle snore from their bedroom down the hall, my mom's soft cough. They were just there, normal, and I was here, broken. I knew I couldn't confront them yet. I needed more information, more proof. This single birth certificate was a monumental discovery, but it was just the first domino. I needed to understand why. Why did they do this? What happened to Eleanor Vance and Daniel Thorne? What was their story? I realized then that my childhood curiosity, which had once been easily appeased by a loving but vague explanation, had now blossomed into an insatiable, desperate hunger for the unfiltered truth. I couldn't live another moment in the dark. And I knew with a chilling certainty that I would have to find those answers myself. Silently, secretly. Because the people who were supposed to tell me everything were the very people who had hidden it all along. That feeling of being an alien in my own home didn't dissipate after that weekend. It solidified into a constant, aching presence. Back at Northwood University, where I was studying English literature, I found myself going through the motions. Classes, studying, spending time with my roommate, Claire. But my mind was always elsewhere, dissecting every memory, every conversation, searching for more cracks in the facade. The wooden box from the attic, with its explosive contents, was tucked away in my closet, under a pile of sweaters, a constant heavy weight on my conscience. I knew I couldn't just drop this. The question of who TF am I echoed endlessly in my head. I had to find out. But how? My parents were masters of secrecy, and I was just a college student with a library card and a shaky internet connection. My solo quest for answers began slowly, cautiously, under the cover of academic research. I told Claire I was working on a genealogy project for a creative writing class, exploring the complexities of family history. She bought it. Luckily, I was a history minor, so it wasn't a total stretch. This gave me an excuse to spend hours in the university library, poring over microfiche and archive newspapers, rather than just Googling names on my laptop, which felt too traceable. My first step was to focus on the names on the real birth certificate, Eleanor Vance and Daniel Thorne. The document listed their names, my date of birth, July 14, 1999, and the hospital, St. Jude's Medical Center in Albany. I started by searching for Eleanor Vance and Daniel Thorne in Albany around that time. This was before Ancestry.com was really mainstream, so it was all old-school digging. I spent hours in the library's genealogy section, looking through old phone books, newspaper archives, anything I could get my hands on. It was tedious, frustrating work. Vance and Thorne weren't uncommon names, and Albany was a decent-sized city. I found dozens of each. My heart would leap with every potential hit, only to sink when it turned out to be the wrong age, the wrong profession, the wrong everything. One afternoon, buried in newspaper archives from 1999, I finally found a tiny lead. A small, almost unremarkable article in the Albany Local Herald, classified section, dated August 2nd, 1999. It was a notice for a missing person. Eleanor Vance, 23, last seen near Washington Park on July 20th, described as 5'6", dark curly hair, green eyes. Please contact Albany PD with any information. July 20th. My birthday was July 14th. So she went missing just 6 days after I was born. My blood ran cold. My mother, my biological mother, Eleanor Vance, had disappeared. This wasn't abandonment. This was something far more sinister. A missing person. My stomach clenched. Was she dead? Was she taken? I dug deeper, searching for any follow-up articles, any arrests, anything. Nothing. The trail went cold almost immediately after that one notice. It was like she vanished into thin air. I tried searching for Daniel Thorne in connection with Eleanor Vance, or separately around that time. Again, a few Daniel Thornes, but none seemed to fit, and no connection to Eleanor. It was a dead end. This new information threw me into an even deeper emotional turmoil. It wasn't just a simple adoption anymore. It was a disappearance. It raised a million more questions. Did my parents know about her disappearance? Were they involved? The thought was sickening, chilling. The more I dug, the more dangerous and dark this whole saga seemed to become. I couldn't share this with anyone. The weight of it, the chilling implications, was immense. Claire would ask me how my genealogy project was going. I'd shrug and say, "Oh, lots of dead ends, nothing too exciting." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. My investigative methods grew bolder, fueled by desperation. I started checking obscure online forums about missing persons in upstate New York from the late 90s, cross-referencing names, places, and dates. I learned how to use public records databases, looking for property records, old marriage licenses, anything that might link Eleanor Vance or Daniel Thorne to each other, or to my parents, Sarah and Richard Miller. One night, a few weeks after finding the missing person ad, I went back to the wooden box in my closet. I carefully pulled out the letters, tied with the faded blue ribbon. They were old, delicate, written in a cursive hand I didn't recognize. I realized they were addressed to Eleanor Vance. I unfolded the top one. It was dated May 1999, just 2 months before I was born. The letter was from a woman named Aunt Beatrice. It was loving, concerned. It talked about Eleanor's situation, hinting at a difficult pregnancy, and offered support. "Honey, you know you always have a home here with me in Willow Creek. Your Uncle Thomas and I are ready to help you however you need. Just tell us when. You're coming." Willow Creek. A small town just outside of Syracuse, about an hour and a half from Albany. Aunt Beatrice. Willow Creek. This was it. A concrete lead. Not just a missing person, but a possible living relative. Someone who knew Eleanor. Someone who might know what happened to her, and why I ended up with the Millers. I felt a surge of hope, laced with profound terror. This was real. These were real people, a real family, my biological family. The emotional roller coaster was dizzying. One moment, I felt a desperate urge to connect, to finally understand. The next, a paralyzing fear of what I might uncover, and what it would mean for my relationship with the people I still, despite everything, loved, even as I resented their deception. The red flags about my parents became increasingly blatant. In my mind, their complete evasion of any questions about my mother's past, the curated family tree that excluded all of Eleanor's existence. It was all about creating a new, separate reality for me. And now, I was ready to shatter it. I made a plan. Willow Creek wasn't too far. I had a car. I could pretend I was visiting. A friend from high school in Syracuse, maybe Chloe. I would drive to Willow Creek, find Aunt Beatrice, and finally get some answers. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and exhilaration. This was no longer just a project. This was my life. And I was about to walk straight into the heart of the mystery. Little did I know, the truth was far more complicated and far more painful than I could have ever imagined. The drive to Willow Creek felt like the longest journey of my life, even though it was only about an hour and a half from my university. Every mile was a new wave of anxiety and anticipation. I told Claire I was heading to Syracuse to visit Chloe and catch up on some reading, which was technically true. I was catching up on reading the truth of my existence. The name Aunt Beatrice from that letter was a beacon, a fragile thread connecting me to a past that had been meticulously erased. Willow Creek was exactly what you'd imagine. Small, picturesque, with a main street lined with brick buildings, and a quaint general store. It felt a world away from the manicured lawns of Oak Haven. I had looked up Beatrice Vance in the Willow Creek phone directory, praying she was still alive and listed. There was one. Beatrice Thorne. I froze. Thorne. Daniel Thorne's last name. Could she be his aunt or his sister? This just complicated things. I found the address, a small, unassuming house on Elm Street, with a porch swing and a meticulously kept flower garden. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was a hummingbird trapped in my chest. What if she slammed the door in my face? What if she knew the Millers? What if she told me something I wasn't ready to hear? Or worse, what if she wasn't Eleanor's Aunt Beatrice, and this was just another dead end? I took a deep, shaky breath, telling myself there was no turning back now. This was my one shot. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked up the short path to the front door. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze. I raised my hand and knocked, a soft rap that felt deafening in the silence. A moment passed. Then, the door opened a crack, revealing a woman with kind, tired eyes and wisps of gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked to be in her late 60s or early 70s, with a soft, comforting presence that immediately put me a tiny bit at ease. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her voice gentle, raspy. "Hi," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "My name is Jessica Miller. I think you might know my mother. Eleanor Vance?" The woman's eyes widened, her face draining of color. She stared at me, then her gaze flickered over my features, lingering on my eyes, my nose. A gasp escaped her lips, a small, choked sound. "Eleanor," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "My God. You look just like her. Exactly like her." Tears welled in her eyes, instantly mirroring the unexpected sting in my own. She opened the door wider, beckoning me inside. "Come in, child. Please. You must be Eleanor's daughter." Her voice trembled with emotion. I stepped into a cozy living room filled with crocheted throws and the scent of lavender and old wood. Old photographs adorned the mantelpiece, and my eyes immediately darted to them, searching. There she was. Eleanor. In more photos, looking vibrant, laughing, sometimes with the man I now knew was Daniel Thorne. And in one, a younger version of Aunt Beatrice, smiling beside Eleanor. "My name is Beatrice Thorne," she said, her voice still thick with tears. "And I'm Eleanor's aunt. My brother was her father." She gestured to a worn armchair. "Sit, dear. Tell me, how did you find me? We never knew what happened. To you." The floodgates opened. I told her everything, finding the birth certificate, the photos, the missing persons notice, the letter in the wooden box. As I spoke, her face shifted between sadness, anger, and profound relief. "Oh, Jessica," she said, her voice cracking as she reached across to take my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Your mother, she loved you so much. We all did." And then she began to unravel the story of my true origins, a story that was both a balm to my aching soul and a fresh wound. Eleanor Vance and Daniel Thorne were high school sweethearts. They were artists, dreamers, deeply in love. Daniel was a budding musician, Eleanor a talented painter. They lived in a small apartment in Albany, barely scraping by, but happy. They were planning to get married. And then Eleanor got pregnant, with me. They were overjoyed, but scared. They didn't have much, but they were determined to make it work. Eleanor called me almost every day during her pregnancy, Aunt Beatrice recounted, tears streaming down her face now. She was so excited, so nervous. She sent me pictures of her belly, showed me the little baby clothes she was knitting. She was glowing. But then, everything changed. Eleanor went into labor early. I was born a few weeks premature, but healthy. Daniel was ecstatic. He even wrote a lullaby for me. But Eleanor had complications, postpartum hemorrhage. They tried everything, but it was too much. "She died, Jessica," Aunt Beatrice choked out, her voice breaking. 6 days after you were born, your mother Eleanor died. My breath hitched. Died, not missing, not abandoned. My mother had died. Just 6 days after giving birth to me. The raw grief that surged through me was immense, overwhelming. I had never known her, but now I was grieving her as if I had. Daniel was He was destroyed, Beatrice continued, wiping her eyes. He was so lost. He had just lost the love of his life, and suddenly, he was a single father to a newborn. He had no family in Albany, no support. He called me, frantic. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas immediately drove to Albany. They helped Daniel with the funeral, with me. They wanted to take us both in, bring us back to Willow Creek. But Daniel, he said he couldn't face it, she whispered. He said seeing you, Jessica, reminded him too much of Eleanor. He was in so much pain. He said he needed time, that he'd be back for you once he'd healed. He said he was going to take you to a relative, a cousin he knew who lived a few towns over, who had always wanted a child and couldn't have one. He promised he'd be back. He promised he would come for you when he was strong enough. He just needed to clear his head, to grieve. A cousin, a few towns over. A cousin who couldn't have children. My parents, Sarah and Richard Miller. He left you with them, Jessica, Beatrice said, her voice hardening with a flicker of anger now. Your father, Daniel, left you with the Millers. We knew them. Sarah was his mother's cousin's daughter, I think. Not a close relative, but family, yes. We assumed he'd be back. We tried to contact them. We called, we wrote letters, but they stopped responding. They vanished, changed their phone number, moved homes. We tried to find you, darling. We searched for years. We put out missing person ads for Daniel too, but nothing. It was like they just disappeared with you. We never knew if Daniel had changed his mind or if something had happened to him too. We had no idea what to do. So, Sarah and Richard Miller, my parents, weren't just random people who kidnapped me. They were a distant cousin of Daniel Thorne's mother, and they took me, and they kept me. They erased my identity, my birth parents, my entire history. Not because they found an abandoned baby, but because they knew my father. And they chose to cut ties, to hide, to lie. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. My head reeled. My mother was dead. My father, Daniel, had abandoned me in a moment of grief, leaving me with distant relatives who then proceeded to wipe him, and Eleanor, from my history. Daniel. Did he ever come back for me? I asked, my voice raw, the words barely audible. Aunt Beatrice shook her head slowly, sadly. We don't know, dear. He vanished, just like you. We never heard from him again. My father was also gone. My biological parents were both gone. One dead, one vanished. And the people who raised me, the people I called Mom and Dad, had built their entire life on a monumental lie, effectively stealing my identity and my past. Aunt Beatrice reached out, pulling me into a warm, surprisingly firm embrace. I'm so sorry, Jessica. So sorry for everything. You have a family, darling. You have us. We never stopped thinking of you. But the hug, while comforting, couldn't erase the crushing weight of the truth. My life, my very existence was a tragedy born of grief, compounded by an unforgivable deception, and the truth, now laid bare, was far more complex and devastating than I could have ever prepared for. I had found my first real family connection, but it came with a story of loss and profound betrayal that sliced deeper than anything I'd known, and there was still so much more to uncover. The questions about Daniel, about the Millers' motive, about the full extent of their deception, they screamed inside my head. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The story Aunt Beatrice Thorne spun that afternoon in her cozy Willow Creek living room was a balm to my aching soul, and simultaneously, a fresh, gaping wound. My biological mother, Eleanor Vance, hadn't abandoned me. She had died. Just 6 days after I was born. The raw, guttural grief that ripped through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was the grief of a lifetime, for a woman I had never known, but whose existence was now so intimately tied to my own. And my father, Daniel Thorne. He didn't vanish by choice. He was broken by grief and left me with distant relatives, promising to return. He never did. And the Millers, Sarah and Richard, my parents. They were the ones who took me, who sealed me away in a meticulously crafted lie, erasing my real family, my real history. Beatrice held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, as she detailed the horrific days following my birth. Eleanor's sudden complications, Daniel's crushing despair. He was a good man, Jessica, she insisted, tears tracing paths down her weathered cheeks. A gentle soul. Music was his life, and Eleanor was his muse. Losing her, it shattered him. He wasn't thinking straight. He said he needed to clear his head just for a little while to mourn. He promised he'd be back for you. She showed me more photos. Eleanor, vibrant, with a paint-splattered smock, her curly hair pulled back, a fierce artistic light in her eyes. My eyes. Daniel, lean and handsome, with a guitar slung over his shoulder, a hopeful, boyish grin. They were so young, so full of life, so clearly in love. Seeing them, truly seeing them, ignited a yearning in me, a profound sense of loss for the life I could have had, the family I was denied. Daniel brought you to Sarah and Richard Miller because he knew them, Beatrice explained, her voice hardening slightly. Sarah was a distant cousin of Daniel's mother, a few times removed. Not close, but a connection. Daniel knew they'd always wanted children, that Sarah couldn't have them. He thought he was doing the right thing, giving you a safe place while he grieved. He didn't realize what they would do. This was it, the motive. Sarah couldn't have children. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying thud. All those years, their unspoken desire for a family of their own. It explained the intensity of their love, the possessiveness, the meticulous curation of my childhood. I wasn't just a child they raised. I was their stolen dream, their living secret. We tried to contact them, Jessica, Beatrice continued, her voice filled with frustrated resignation. After weeks, when Daniel didn't return and the Millers stopped answering our calls, we went to their house. They had moved, vanished. No forwarding address. We called the police, but they said without Daniel's direct consent or proof of neglect, they couldn't intervene in a private family arrangement. We even hired a private investigator for a while, but it was like they fell off the face of the earth. We feared the worst for Daniel, too. We couldn't find you. My brother, Eleanor's father, he never recovered. He passed away a few years later, broken-hearted. The sheer audacity of the Millers. To take me, a grieving father's child, and then disappear, to wipe out my entire past as if it never existed. The betrayal was an almost physical ache. It wasn't just a lie. It was an active, continuous act of erasure. I stayed with Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas that night. Their house, while unfamiliar, felt like home in a way my Oak Haven house never had. They didn't have much, but their warmth, their shared grief for Eleanor, and their profound relief at finding me, enveloped me. Uncle Thomas, a quiet man with kind eyes, echoed Beatrice's stories, adding small details about Daniel's passion for blues music or Eleanor's whimsical drawings. They brought out old photo albums filled with pictures of Eleanor growing up, of family gatherings I'd never been a part of, and in so many of them, I saw glimpses of myself. It was like looking at a lost mirror, finally reflecting my true lineage. The next morning, fortified by their stories and a new sense of purpose, I decided I needed to understand the full extent of the Millers' deception. Aunt Beatrice had kept a small box of documents, letters, and newspaper clippings related to Eleanor and Daniel's disappearance, their efforts to find me. It was raw, unvarnished evidence from their side. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of emotional and literal digging. Back at Northwood, my genealogy project became my sole focus. I cross-referenced the details Beatrice gave me with what I knew of the Millers. The move. Aunt Beatrice said the Millers moved right after taking me. I remembered my parents always saying they'd lived in Oakhaven forever. A subtle but significant lie. They hadn't moved within Oakhaven. They'd moved to Oakhaven to hide me. My mom's past. Sarah Miller, my supposed mother, had always been so vague about her family, claiming her parents died young. Now I knew why. She had no parents to speak of in the context of my life. She was essentially a blank slate, designed to obscure my true origins. Even her seemingly absent extended family wasn't just due to death. It was a deliberate cutting off of any ties that could potentially lead back to Daniel or Eleanor. David. My brother David. He was 4 years older than me. If the Millers adopted me as a baby, then David would have been around 4. How could he not remember anything about me arriving? How could he not remember his parents adopting a baby? This was a huge, painful question. I remembered him being the golden child, always trusted, always knowing everything. Could he have been in on it? No, that felt impossible. He was too young. More likely, he was just as manipulated as I was. Simply presented with a new baby sister and told that's how it was. The thought of him discovering this truth felt like another knife twist. I specifically looked into Sarah Miller's background, using the limited information Aunt Beatrice had about her being Daniel's distant cousin. I found a few old public records, online, property deeds, utility bills, from a small town 2 counties over, for a Sarah Jenkins, dated just before my birth year. Sarah Jenkins, not Sarah Miller. And then, a marriage certificate, Sarah Jenkins marrying Richard Miller. A new name, a new identity for her, completely obscuring her connection to the Thorne Vance family. They hadn't just moved. They had effectively rebranded themselves to disappear. The more I uncovered, the more meticulously planned the deception appeared. It wasn't a spontaneous act of kindness gone wrong. It was a deliberate, calculated theft of a child, and erasure of her past. Every loving gesture, every childhood memory, every "I love you" from my parents became tainted. Was it love, or was it the ultimate form of control? Was it affection, or was it guilt? I couldn't tell anymore. My beautiful, secure childhood was nothing more than a carefully constructed cage, designed to keep the truth out and me in. The rage simmered, a low, constant burn beneath my skin. How could they? How could they look me in the eye every day? Teach me about honesty, about integrity, about the importance of family, all while living such a monumental lie. The hypocrisy was sickening. Every red flag I'd ever rationalized away, my mother's evasiveness about her past, the lack of her family photos, the bizarre medical history forms, now screamed at me, proving their deliberate, chilling deception. Had to confront them. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Eleanor and Daniel, about Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas, about the family that had been ripped apart and then tirelessly searched for me. This was about exposing the truth, not just for my own sanity, but for justice. The thought of facing them filled me with a cocktail of terror and vengeful resolve. How would they react? Would they deny it? Would they finally break down and explain? I imagined the scene 100 times, playing out every possible scenario in my head. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The Richard and Sarah Miller I knew were calm, collected, unflappable. But I also knew they were master manipulators. capable of a lie so profound it shaped an entire human life. I spent hours crafting what I would say, rehearsing it in my dorm room, tears streaming down my face as I spoke to an empty chair, pretending it was them. I packed a small bag. I knew, deep down, that once the truth was spoken, there was no going back. The family I knew would be shattered, irreparably. But living with the lie was no longer an option. The weight of it was crushing me. The truth, however painful, was my only path forward. I called my parents, calm on the surface, my voice steady. "Mom, Dad," I said, "I'm coming home this weekend. We need to talk. There's something important." And I could hear, even through the phone, a slight shift in their tone, a subtle unease that told me they sensed something was profoundly wrong. They just didn't know how profoundly wrong it was about to get for them. My life was about to be laid bare, and so was theirs. The drive home to Oak Haven felt like a journey to a different planet, one that looked familiar, but was utterly alien. My carefully constructed composure was cracking around the edges. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The birth certificate, the old photos of Eleanor and Daniel, and Aunt Beatrice's letters, the physical evidence of my stolen past, were tucked into a folder in my backpack, heavy with the weight of shattered trust. I had rehearsed the confrontation 1,000 times in my head, but no amount of practice could prepare me for the earthquake I was about to unleash. I pulled into the familiar driveway, the wraparound porch looking idyllic in the afternoon sun, a cruel mockery of the turmoil within. My dad, Richard, was watering the hydrangeas, his back to me. My mom, Sarah, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, a soft, expectant smile on her face. "Jess, honey, you're here. We just made a fresh batch of iced tea." Their normalcy was almost unbearable. The sight of them, acting like the loving, innocent parents they'd always pretended to be, fueled a potent mix of sorrow and righteous fury. I walked past my dad, offering a tight-clipped "hi," and went straight inside. My mom followed me, her smile faltering slightly, as she registered the tension radiating from me. "Jess? What's wrong?" she asked, her gentle voice laced with concern. I turned to face them both in the living room, the very heart of the home that was built on their lies. My dad had come in from the garden, wiping dirt from his hands. Their faces, so familiar, so beloved, now seemed like masks. "What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice surprisingly calm, though it trembled on the last word. "What's wrong is that my entire life is a lie. What's wrong is that you stole me. What's wrong is that you pretended to be my parents for 20 years while my real family grieved for me and for the mother I never knew." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My mom's face went utterly white, her eyes wide with shock, her hand flying to her mouth, just as it had that day in the attic when I asked about the Victorian house. My dad, usually so composed, visibly flinched, his jaw tightening. "Jessica, what are you talking about?" Richard said, his voice low, a flicker of warning in his tone. "That's a ridiculous thing to say." "Is it?" I reached into my backpack, pulling out the folder. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to be steady. "Is this ridiculous, Mom, or this, Dad?" I pulled out the original birth certificate, laying it flat on the coffee table. "Eleanor Vance, Daniel Thorne. Are these names ridiculous to you?" Sarah stared at the document, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't deny it. Richard's gaze darted from the certificate to my face, then back to Sarah. The color drained from his face too. The silence was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing. "And these?" I produced the photos of Eleanor and Daniel, placing them beside the birth certificate. "She looks just like me, doesn't she, Mom? Because she is me. This is my mother, my biological mother, Eleanor Vance, who died 6 days after I was born. Did you tell me that, Mom? Did you tell me my father, Daniel Thorne, was broken with grief and left me with you, his distant cousin, promising to come back, but never did. Did you tell me you disappeared with me, cutting off all contact with my grieving family?" My voice rose, raw with years of buried pain and current fury. "Did you tell me Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas searched for me for years? Did you tell me my real grandfather died of a broken heart because he never knew what happened to his grandchild?" Sarah crumbled onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face, her hands covering her mouth, shaking uncontrollably. Richard stood rigid, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. We can explain, honey," Sarah choked out, sobbing. "Please, just let us explain." "Explain what? Explain why my entire life was a lie? Explain why you stole my identity, my history, my real family." I paced the room, unable to stand still. "You taught me honesty, integrity, family values, all while living the most monumental lie imaginable. How could you?" Richard finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot, filled with a mixture of shame and something else. A desperate plea. "We loved you, Jessica. We loved you so much. That's not love," I spat, the word tasting like bile. "That's possession. That's manipulation. You built your happiness on a foundation of deceit." Then Sarah, through her sobs, began to speak, her voice barely audible. I couldn't have children, Jess. You know how much I wanted a family. We tried for years. When Daniel came to us, he was so broken. He said he just needed a few weeks, a few months to get himself together. He asked us to take you in. We adored you from the moment we saw you. You were so tiny, so perfect. Richard joined in, his voice rough. He never came back, Jess. We waited. We called his phone, but it was disconnected. His apartment was empty. We tried contacting his family, but they didn't know where he was. We genuinely believed he had abandoned you. That's a lie, I countered, thrusting Aunt Beatrice's letters at them. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas tried to find you. They called, they wrote, they even hired a private investigator. You moved. You changed your names. Sarah Jenkins, remember that name? You deliberately cut them off. They both recoiled, as if struck. The specific detail of Sarah Jenkins clearly shocked them. It proved I had dug far deeper than they anticipated. They couldn't deny that. We thought it was best for you, Richard stammered, desperation entering his voice. We thought if Daniel had truly left you, if he was gone, we could give you a stable, loving home, a fresh start. We loved you as our own. You were our daughter. And what about Eleanor? I demanded, my voice cracking. What about her family? Did you even tell them she died? Or did you just let them think Daniel vanished with me, leaving them to grieve two missing people? They couldn't answer. They just looked at me, broken, exposed. Their silence was damning. Suddenly, the front door opened, and my brother David walked in, keys jingling in his hand. He took one look at the scene, my parents weeping, me standing over them, furious, the birth certificate and photos strewn on the coffee table, and his face went from casual to utterly bewildered. What the hell is going on here? He asked, his voice sharp with confusion. I turned to him, the pain of knowing this was about to blow up his world too, warring with the desperate need for the truth to be fully out. David, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mom and Dad aren't our parents, not mine anyway, and you have a sister, Daniel, but she's gone. David just stared at me, then at our parents, who now couldn't even meet his gaze. His jaw dropped. What are you talking about, Jess? Are you insane? No, David, I'm not, I said, picking up the birth certificate and handing it to him. Read it. He took it, his brow furrowed in disbelief. He scanned the names. Eleanor Vance, Daniel Thorne. His eyes widened, comprehension slowly dawning, replaced by a dawning horror. He looked from the document to our parents, then back to me, his face utterly bewildered. "Mom? Dad?" David whispered, his voice laced with pure devastation. Is this true?" Sarah sobbed louder, burying her face in her hands. Richard finally slumped onto the sofa beside her, defeated. The silence from them was the only confirmation David needed. The fallout was immediate, brutal. David, unable to process it, stormed out of the house. My parents remained in their grief, utterly broken. I stood there, utterly numb, the years of lies finally exposed. There was no going back. The family I knew, the perfect Miller family, was a shattered illusion, and in its place was a gaping void, filled with questions, and the chilling realization that my life had just truly, unequivocally begun. I had torn down the walls of their carefully constructed prison, and now I was free. But freedom, I realized, was a terrifyingly lonely place when you had no idea who you were anymore. The silence that descended upon the Miller house after David stormed out was heavier than any words. It was the silence of imploded worlds, of shattered trust, of a family utterly broken. My parents, Sarah and Richard, were still on the sofa, locked in their silent grief, their defenses completely down. But I felt no pity, only a hollow ache. The truth was out, but the raw devastation it left in its wake was almost unbearable. I didn't stay that night. I couldn't. Every object in that house, every photograph, every scent, felt like a complicit participant in the decades-long lie. I grabbed my backpack, the folder with my real birth certificate, and Eleanor's photos still clutched within. I got in my car and drove, aimlessly at first, then instinctively towards Willow Creek, towards Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas, towards the only people who offered me a flicker of genuine history, a glimpse of my true lineage. They welcomed me with open arms, sensing the storm I had weathered. I collapsed onto their sofa, the story tumbling out in ragged bursts, interspersed with sobs and moments of raw, shaking anger. They listened patiently, their faces etched with sympathy, but not surprise. They had waited 20 years for this. The days that followed were a blur of intense emotion and a profound sense of realignment. I finally had a place to land, a temporary haven where my story was not only believed but understood. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas became my anchors. They didn't have the answers to all my questions about Daniel's disappearance, but they provided context, love, and a sense of belonging that I had been unknowingly starving for my entire life. They shared more stories about Eleanor and Daniel. They painted a picture of two free spirits, deeply in love, full of artistic dreams. Eleanor, a gifted painter whose vibrant canvases now seemed to call to me from old photographs. Daniel, a soulful musician who had dreams of playing in jazz clubs. I learned that Eleanor had been known for her vivacious laugh, her penchant for bright colors, and her unwavering loyalty to her friends. Daniel, for his quiet intensity, his poetic lyrics, and his deep, abiding love for Eleanor. These weren't just names on a birth certificate. They were real people, my parents, and I began to feel a deep, almost spiritual connection to them. I immersed myself in their world. I found old recordings of Daniel's music, scratchy cassette tapes of him playing guitar, his voice raw and emotive. I found a few of Eleanor's small, vibrant sketches and paintings tucked away in a dusty art box. Holding a paintbrush she had used listening to the lullaby Daniel had written for me, these were visceral connections to the people who had given me life. It was a reclaiming, piece by agonizing piece, of the identity that had been stolen. My relationship with David was a much more complex, painful beast. He called me the day after the confrontation, his voice raw with disbelief and hurt. He was enraged, confused, devastated. "Jess, is this real? Our parents? They lied to us? Our whole lives?" He couldn't wrap his head around it. He went to confront Sarah and Richard himself, and the ensuing chaos I heard was even worse than my own confrontation. They had lied to him, too, about his sister, about their own lives. He felt as betrayed as I did, but his betrayal was different. He hadn't lost his identity, only his perception of his family. He struggled to accept that the people he'd always admired, always trusted, were capable of such a monstrous deception. For a while, David swung between anger at them and anger at me for blowing up his world. It was messy, unfair, but understandable. I tried to be patient, knowing he was processing his own version of this shattering truth. We slowly began to rebuild our sibling bond, not as children of Sarah and Richard Miller, but as two individuals connected by a shared, traumatic history and an inexplicable bond. We were both victims of the same lie, albeit in different ways. As for Sarah and Richard Miller, I maintained a strict distance. They called. They sent texts, filled with apologies, pleas for understanding, expressions of their love. They truly believed they had done it out of love, out of a desperate desire for a child. They couldn't seem to grasp the magnitude of the betrayal, the fundamental dishonesty of their actions. I agreed to meet them a few weeks later, with Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas present, for a facilitated conversation. It was excruciating. They apologized, they cried, they reiterated their love. But there was no genuine understanding of the trauma they had inflicted, no real recognition of my loss. They wanted forgiveness, not true reconciliation based on accountability. I explained my boundaries. They were no longer Mom and Dad. They were Sarah and Richard. And until they genuinely understood the harm they had caused, until they acknowledged the theft of my identity and family, I could not have a relationship with them. It was a painful but necessary boundary. It was the only way I could begin to heal and rebuild my own life, free from their narrative. Reclaiming my true identity wasn't just about finding Eleanor and Daniel's story. It was about honoring it. It meant connecting with Beatrice and Thomas, who became my true grandparents, showering me with the unconditional love and knowledge of my heritage that I had missed. It meant exploring my own creative inclinations, something Eleanor had clearly possessed. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, feeling a strange, inherent connection to the strokes, to the colors. I started seeing a therapist, processing the layers of grief, betrayal, and identity confusion. It was a long, arduous process. Learning to trust again, to reconcile the loving parents I had known with the deceptive individuals they truly were. It was about separating the good memories from the toxic foundation they were built upon. It was about understanding that their love was inextricably linked to their lie. The journey of reclaiming my true identity was profound. It wasn't just about finding my roots. It was about accepting the complexities of my origin story. It was about recognizing the strength of Eleanor and Daniel, the resilience of Beatrice and Thomas, and the courage it took to stand up to the people who had stolen my past. I was still Jessica Emily Miller, but now I knew the full story behind those names. And as I slowly began to forge new connections, build new relationships, and embrace the truth of who I was, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never known. The shattered pieces of my life were slowly, painstakingly, being put back together, forming a new, authentic mosaic. I had found my way back to myself. But myself was no longer the naive young woman who had stumbled upon a wooden box in an attic. That Jessica Miller was gone, irrevocably shattered by the truth. What remained was a mosaic of old pieces and newly discovered ones, painstakingly being put back together. The silence from the Miller house, the one I had grown up in, was now a permanent fixture. Sarah and Richard continued to reach out, their messages a mix of tearful apologies and bewildered attempts to justify their actions. They still clung to the narrative that they had acted out of love, completely oblivious to the profound emotional violence of their deception. I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I spent the next few months living with Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas in Willow Creek. It was a period of intense healing, a quiet, almost spiritual immersion into the true fabric of my lineage. Their small house, once a temporary haven, became a sanctuary. They gave me space to grieve, to rage, to ask endless questions, and they answered with unwavering patience and honesty. I learned more about Eleanor and Daniel than I ever thought possible. Beatrice pulled out an old guitar that had belonged to Daniel, its strings still smelling faintly of wood and thyme. She taught me the chords to the lullaby he had written for me, a bittersweet melody that now, finally, brought me comfort instead of pain. I found an old easel in the attic, along with a stack of Eleanor's unfinished canvases, her vibrant, abstract landscapes calling to me. For the first time in my life, I felt a deep, undeniable pull towards art, towards expressing the torrent of emotions swirling within me. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a connection, a heritage, a way to honor the mother I had lost. My relationship with David, my brother, my biological brother, was the slowest and most complex piece of the healing puzzle. After our explosive confrontation, he had gone completely silent for a week. Then, he called, his voice rough, broken. He had confronted Sarah and Richard, and the full weight of their deception, how it had twisted his perception of our family, had hit him hard. He felt betrayed by his parents, yes, but also a strange, inexplicable anger at me for being the catalyst. "Why couldn't you have just left it alone, Jess?" He'd snapped once, in a moment of raw pain. "Why did you have to blow everything up?" It was a painful truth, that sometimes the truth hurts the innocent bystander as much as the deceiver. But David, bless his stubborn heart, eventually came around. He drove to Willow Creek one weekend, tentative, unsure. He met Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas, heard their stories, saw the photos of Eleanor and Daniel. He listened to Daniel's music. And slowly, the pieces started to click for him too. The quiet resentment in his voice softened into a shared grief, a shared sense of loss. We were both victims of the same lie, but our paths to healing were different. He was mourning the loss of his perfect family, while I was mourning the loss of a life I never had. We started talking, truly talking, for the first time since childhood. We built a new foundation, not on the Miller's lies, but on our shared DNA, our shared trauma, and a newfound fragile honesty. It was messy, it was hard, but it was real. And in time, it became a stronger, more authentic bond than we'd ever had. The boundaries with Sarah and Richard remained firm. I couldn't cut them out completely, not after 2 decades of my life being intertwined with theirs. But I had to protect my fragile healing. I established clear rules. Communication would be limited, mostly by text or email. No unannounced visits. No more calls asking for forgiveness. If we spoke, it was about neutral topics, not my past or their lies. They continued to express their love and regret, but it was always centered on their pain, their loss of me, never truly on the profound harm they had inflicted. I came to understand that they genuinely believed they had done a loving thing, adopting a child whose father had vanished. Their biggest blind spot was the deliberate active suppression of my birth identity and the severing of ties with my biological family. They could not, or would not, acknowledge the theft of my identity. And until they did, true reconciliation was impossible. It hurt, but for my own sanity, I had to accept that. Sometimes, the people who hurt you the most are the ones who truly believe they loved you. The question of Daniel Thorne, my biological father, lingered like a ghost. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas had done everything they could to find him. I tried too, endlessly searching online, contacting missing persons databases, even hiring a private investigator for a short period when I could afford it. Nothing. It was like he had vanished off the face of the earth after leaving me with the Millers. Was he alive? Did he ever truly intend to come back for me? Did he die? Lost somewhere in his grief? The uncertainty was a constant ache. Eventually I had to make peace with the possibility that I might never know. I mourned him too. The father who was broken by grief. The artist who loved my mother so fiercely. I accepted that his story was part of mine, even if it remained unfinished. His music, his lullaby, became a symbol of that acceptance. A beautiful, melancholic melody that acknowledged both his love and his absence. Reclaiming my identity wasn't just about the past. It was about shaping my future. I decided to pursue art. After graduating from Northwood, I applied to a fine arts program at a small college near Syracuse, specializing in abstract painting. I felt Eleanor's presence in every brushstroke, every color choice. It wasn't just a talent, it was a way to connect with her, to continue her legacy. I also became an advocate for adopted children, sharing my story, anonymously at first, then more openly, on online forums, highlighting the importance of open adoptions and the right of children to know their full biological history. It was a way to turn my pain into purpose. The meaning of family expanded for me. It wasn't just blood, though finding my biological roots was crucial. It was about connection, honesty, and unwavering love, regardless of legal paperwork. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas, my true grandparents, became pillars of my life. David and I, though still navigating our individual healing journeys, forged an unbreakable bond. I also found strength in my chosen family, my friends, who stood by me, listened without judgment, and offered unwavering support through the chaos. My roommate Claire, my best friend Chloe, they were there. Looking back, the red flags that dotted my seemingly perfect childhood weren't just subtle quirks. They were the fault lines in the carefully constructed facade. My mother's evasiveness, the missing history, the sudden move. All of it, now, glaringly obvious. It was a stark lesson in the power of denial, both theirs and my own. I had wanted to believe in the perfect story so badly that I ignored the tremors beneath the surface. This saga, my saga, is not about hate. It's about truth. It's about the profound impact of secrets, even those born from what some might call love. It's about learning who you are, even when that discovery shatters your entire world. It's about rebuilding, piece by agonizing, peace, and finding strength in the fragments. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest acts of love can also be the most devastating betrayals. I'm still on this journey. Healing isn't linear. There are days when the grief for Eleanor is overwhelming, days when the anger at Sarah and Richard flares, days when the ache for Daniel's presence is profound. But there are also days filled with immense gratitude, for Beatrice and Thomas, for David, for the artistic legacy Eleanor passed down, for the resilience I found within myself. My life is no longer a perfect story, but it's a real one. It's messy, complicated, and bears the scars of a monumental lie. But it's authentically mine, and that, I've learned, is more valuable than any carefully curated illusion. The truth, however painful, always prevails. And in its aftermath, you find out who you truly are, and who your real family truly is. This is my story. This is who TF I married, and more importantly, who TF I actually am. And so, we arrive at the quiet end of this long, winding road we've traveled together tonight. It feels almost like watching a complex tapestry slowly unspool, thread by thread, until the full, intricate pattern is finally laid bare. The truth, in all its stark, undeniable reality, can be a harsh light sometimes, stripping away the comfort of the familiar shadows we've lived in. But, oh, the peace that settles when those shadows finally recede, revealing the true landscape beneath, discovering where I truly came from, understanding the silent symphony of secrets that shaped my early life, has been transformative. It's like finding missing pieces to a puzzle you didn't even know was incomplete. The initial shock, the grief for a history denied, still echoes sometimes, a faint, distant whisper. But now, it's accompanied by a profound sense of rootedness, a connection to a past I was always meant to know. It teaches you that while foundations can be built on shaky ground, you always have the power to rebuild, to forge new connections, and to define your own truth. The greatest lesson, perhaps, is the quiet insistence of truth itself. It has a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deeply buried, and when it does, it demands to be acknowledged, to be understood, and ultimately, to be integrated into the narrative of who you are. So, if there's a quiet whisper in your own life, urging you to look closer, to question what feels off, listen to it. Trust that gentle inner compass. Because finding your own truth, however messy the journey, is the most liberating journey you'll ever embark upon. The world outside is hushed now, wrapped in the deep embrace of the night. This story, too, settles into stillness. It's okay if your thoughts begin to drift, if the edges of the day soften and blur. You've listened with an open heart, and I am so deeply grateful for that. Thank you for listening all the way through. I wish you tranquil thoughts and the sweetest of dreams.